So going on to Saturday, Ellis Park. Are we potentially talking about rugby's greatest fixture rugby's greatest international fixture? From my perspective, over the years, New Zealand v South Africa at Ellis Park has produced classic after classic. So for the audience today, we've come up with 4 different matches over the professional era of the All Blacks and Springboks at Ellis Park. And we're going to discuss them in detail because, like I said, I think this is, if New Zealand and South Africa is rugby's greatest rivalry, New Zealand v South Africa at Ellis Park is rugby's greatest international match occasion. So we start off with 2000. New Zealand, South Africa, August the 19th, 2000, Ellis Park. South Africa beaten New Zealand by 46 points to 40. Now this kind of has a bit of resemblance to, let's say, the era of last year with Razor being under pressure and eventually sacked from his coaching role. The All Blacks would lose this game, and the following week, the Wallabies would go on and beat South Africa 19-18 by 1 point, and consequently go on to win the Tri-Nations. They did it the following year in 2001 in similar circumstances, claiming 2 Tri-Nations in a row. As a result, Wayne Smith, having won, I think, 12 out of 17 games for the All Blacks in his 2-year tenure, lost his job, and we haven't seen another All Blacks coach lose their job until Razor lost his earlier this year in similar circumstances, having lost the Rugby Championship to South Africa both years. Obviously, last year it was a bit closer, and the loss to South Africa was the game that decided it. This match was an all-out classic, 86 points from both teams, 6 tries to 4. What was your memory of this match? Did you watch it live in the middle of the night?
Yeah, I did. Tana Umaga streaking down the wing. There was some great open running rugby in this game. It was something that we wouldn't have seen a lot of, a contest with so many points, so much back and forth, and Tana Umaga was exceptional on the wing. I think it's also good to point out with this game that there were 2 coaches from this weekend's game that were playing then, which is Tana Umaga and Rassie Erasmus. And so there's a bit of history leading into this weekend. But then obviously Werner Swanepoel breaking New Zealand hearts in the dying moments after Robbie Fleck ran riot all day against the All Blacks at altitude. One of the all-time greats, this one, and had everyone holding on to the edge of their seat for the best part of the game. Attacking rugby at its finest in the year 2000. That they were my core memories of this game, this classic.
So this one was a little bit before my time, but what you can see from the scoreline in an era where, high scorelines weren't really the novel of the day, it was a beautiful game of attacking rugby. You see on the highlights, Christian Cullen really running amok, but also South Africa having familiar names, like you said, with Rassie Erasmus on the field there. Following on from that, we go forward to 2013. Probably the greatest rugby championship game of all time, maybe one of the greatest rugby matches I have ever seen. I remember waking up in the middle of the night. The scene was set. South Africa had to win with a bonus point, and they had to stop New Zealand from getting a bonus point in order to win the rugby championship. So in that era, Heineke Meyer, I think South Africa had been slightly conservative throughout the year, the traditional big forwards, up the guts kind of rugby. But because they had to get that 4th try to win the championship, they just decided to cut loose. And what happened was just off the charts. New Zealand eventually winning the game 38-27. But for a small moment in the second half, South Africa leading by 27 points to 24 after scoring 2 early tries in the second half by Willie Leroux and Jean de Villiers. They claimed that bonus point, and all they needed to do was win by 8 points and deny New Zealand that bonus point try to win the championship. Now, I remember at this point in the second half, messaging my mates at 3 a.m. saying, is this the best rugby game you've ever seen, or at least in the last 5 years? Man, it was off the scale. There was one phase of play where I think New Zealand countered attack out of their 22, kicked ahead, and Willie Leroux countered back and managed to break down the line again. And I think it went back and forth. It was that early second half period. To go along with that, Kieran Reid was absolutely at the peak of his powers, wasn't he? Just absolutely off the scale. I think I always say to my friends, 2013 Kieran Reid winning World Player of the Year. There has never, ever been a clearer cut World Player of the Year than 2013 Kieran Reid. He was playing rugby from another planet, wasn't he?
That was his trademark performance as well. He had an absolute monster of a game that day. He was at the peak of his powers. You're absolutely right. And he took the game by the scruff of the neck, really stood up and showed his leadership qualities and said, right, boys, come with me. We're gonna take this one. We're going to snatch it and we're going to go the distance. And that was a very high caliber All Blacks team too. We had Julian Savea at the peak of his powers. Beauden Barrett was absolutely phenomenal. And yeah, guys that could just run an absolute mark. So they were never, ever out of the game. And I think even Nigel Owen said it was the greatest game he's ever refereed. It was just that electric, so much on the line in a non-World Cup year. And the All Blacks have done that a couple of times in South Africa where the chips have been down. It seems like they're completely out of it. And somehow they pull it out of the fire. And that was definitely one of those occasions. Kieran Reid, man of the match performance. And yeah, obviously went on to claim even more honours. So absolutely, that one sticks out to me, even though the scoreline probably wasn't as close as the game would have suggested. It definitely showed a lot of the qualities that we think of when we think of the All Blacks teams of that era.
And you can see in the lineups there, still a couple guys remaining from those matchday squads that day. Sia Khaleesi came off the bench early on for the injured Willem Alberts, and that was a game that he kind of put himself in the shop window for further selections later down the track. Brian Habana scored 2 unbelievable early tries, one off a massive kick chase to put them 15-7 ahead early on before going off with a hamstring injury. It's just a game that had it all. It's for sure the greatest rugby championship Tri-Nations game I've seen in my lifetime, and potentially the greatest game outside of Rugby World Cups ever. Going on to the following year, nearly to a year to the day later, New Zealand coming into this match with a 22-game unbeaten streak. Not a winning streak because they did draw to the Wallabies earlier in the Rugby Championship, but 22 games unbeaten. This was an All Blacks team at the peak of their powers, and a Springbok team inspired early on by the young Andre Pollard, a guy obviously still in the picture today, scoring 2 tries in the first half, would go on to beat the All Blacks by 27 points to 25, thanks to late 5-meter penalty from Pat Lambie. Now, Kiwis will say that the penalty against Liam Messam in that game was contentious, and I'm sure plenty of South Africans in the comments will tell us to do one. But what another magnificent game. What is your memory of this one?
Yeah, I think this was one for me where Andre Pollard really put his name up in lights. He absolutely killed that first half. And if you look back on some of the highlights, he looks so incredibly young, but he really took control in that 10 jersey and showed that there was a like a new future, and it looked like it was going to be Andre Pollard and Pat Lambie contesting the number 10 jersey for the Springboks for years. And Pat Lambie kicking that last minute penalty to break New Zealand hearts. That's the one. I mean, there's moments in life that you remember for all the best reasons and all the worst reasons. This is the one, as All Blacks fans, you remember for all the worst reasons, having your heart broken with a last minute penalty. That's the one that jumps out for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, I made a video earlier on about Duane Vermeulen in 2014, because if Kieran Reid was the best player in the world in 2013, I was screaming it for all year that Duane Vermeulen was the best player in the world in 2014. Now, Kiwis will disagree with me, as Brodie Retallick would go on to win World Player of the Year that year. But what Duane Vermeulen produced, not just in this Ellis Park game, but in the game in Westpac Stadium in Wellington a few weeks earlier, was absolutely magnificent. He went toe-to-toe with Kieran Reid all over the park, but he came into this game with an injury cloud as well. He had a broken rib, or a damaged rib, I believe, before the game started. Kind of had an injury cloud. They weren't sure if he was going to start, if Schalk Burger was going to come in, who was also coming back from injury, off into the number 8 jersey. But he stood on the field, he played, and he put himself around the park like no other number 8 does. He got over the ball and winning the final turnover in the final act of the game, 5 meters from his own try line. And there's famous footage on the screen there afterwards of Heineke Meyer going absolutely ballistic, seeing he'd won the winning penalty, and South Africa had finally broken that drought against the Springboks. They hadn't won in 5 games against New Zealand. Heineke Meyer, it was his first and only win against the All Blacks, and the All Blacks one of only 3 losses between the end of the 2011 World Cup and the end of the 2015 World Cup, just showing how dominant they really were. Magnificent game, back to back. Now we go forward to our last game of the series. 2022, a very different picture in this match. This match had a huge cloud over it going into it. All Blacks had just lost a series against Ireland. They lost the first test pretty convincingly, put in what many would describe as a pretty abject performance. There had been coaching changes with Brad Moore and John Plumtree losing their jobs. And Mark Robertson, the CEO of New Zealand Rugby, had actually travelled out to South Africa. The writing was on the wall. Everyone, if they didn't know it, they felt it, that this was going to be Fozzie's last match. And what unfolded was a performance from the players to the coach. Ardie Savea, after the match, saying, "This is our coach. We play for our coach." What do you remember from this match?
Funnily enough, I actually remember one of the last, this is a weird one. I remember one of the last plays where Scott Barrett was adamant that Ardie Savea had scored and that New Zealand had pretty much tied up the game, and he was shouting at the referee. And then 2 phases later, Scott Barrett actually scored himself. But this was one where, like, Richie Mo'unga had a field day. I think he threw an intercept pass for Peter Steph du Toit at one point there, but New Zealand jumped out to a lead. Richie Mo'unga was ripping cutout balls, and New Zealand were running rampant on the edges. And you just knew from the moment that they walked out into the field there that they were on. They had a performance like that in them, and they decided to bring it out when it was last chance saloon for Ian Foster. But that just showed how much they loved Fozzie, how well they regarded him. And it was great to see a New Zealand team take that accountability, that they knew that they were the reason that his head was on the chopping block. And they rallied together and put in a performance that was worthy of, of what it means to wear the black jersey. And that was a pretty special moment. I think going into that game, I thought, this is it. Like, how are we going to take down the Springboks at Ellis Park when we've just lost a series, and it's pretty much a done deal that Fozzie's gone. Like, it'd be easy enough just to put the cue in the rack and say we'll give it a crack. But yeah, that performance, and it was a year out from a World Cup too. You don't want to be, no good side wants to be changing their coach a year out from the World Cup. And yeah, he's pretty, he's done something pretty good there to get the best out of the players for that game. That's for sure.
'Cause you can see on the screen here now that that picture of Ian Foster and Aaron Smith, Fozzie's arm around Aaron Smith, just the sheer relief, the sheer love. You could tell, I think this was in the media shortly after the game, before anything had been announced about whether or not he was going to stay on. And the signs were all there that the love between Fozzie and his team was real. And he hadn't, in fact, lost the changing room. Just to go on to it from a South African perspective, not much good things to report from that day, except for the performance of one man in the 13 jersey, Lukhanyo Am. There was an injury on the wing early on. I can't exactly remember who came out, who replaced him. I think, but there was Lukhanyo Am moved out to the wing, a position he doesn't often play. I don't think he's ever started for the Springboks, and had one of the games of his life, scoring a try, just breaking tackles down the wing. There was one, and this was a turning point in the game, I think. There was one breakout from him from his own 22, carving up the All Blacks defence and throwing one of the most beautiful long passes I've ever seen to Makazola Mapimpi, who would go on and score. This was wheeled back because the TMO judged it as a forward pass. For sure, a turning point in the game. For me personally, I didn't think it was a forward pass. That move deserved a try. Listen to that one, South Africans. But it was, he played one of the games of his life. But apart from that, for South Africa, wasn't really much to write home about that day.